Welcome to the Sleepy Heaven, a place where we explore stories pulsing with deep emotions and universal lessons. I'm your host, John, and tonight I invite you to join us in a tale that speaks of waiting, loyalty, and the unbreakable connection between a being and its home. In this episode, we delve into the life of Argos, a faithful guardian who shows us that hope is a flame neither time nor adversity can extinguish. Through his eyes, we will discover the strength found in patience and love, and how the bonds we create can endure even beyond ourselves. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let yourself feel the heartbeat of this story. Within it, Ithaca's fields will whisper to us about the beauty of loyalty, and an old olive tree will remind us that in the deep roots of love, we will always find a home.
Close your eyes and take a deep, slow, mindful breath. Feel the air entering your lungs, bringing with it a sense of calm and connection. As you exhale, imagine releasing the weight of time, allowing your mind to settle, like the roots of an olive tree beneath the soil of Ithaca. Visualize a serene landscape before you. Golden fields of wheat swaying gently to the rhythm of the wind, while the morning sun bathes everything in its warm light. In the distance, you hear the whisper of the sea caressing the shores and the rustling of olive leaves. This ancient, wise tree is like your life, steady, deep, and filled with stories within each ring of its trunk. Now imagine the most cherished moments of your life, like the memories a traveler carries in their heart. Each one is unique, like footprints in the sand or the scents carried by the breeze. Think of the warmth of a reunion, the loyalty of a true friendship, or the comfort of a place you always call home. These memories are the branches of your olive tree, growing toward the sky yet always returning to their roots. With every breath, focus on the bonds that connect you to those you love. Picture acts of kindness and devotion, a promise fulfilled, patient waiting, or the unconditional loyalty of a faithful guardian. These connections are the roots that sustain your tree, giving it strength even on the darkest days. As you inhale, reflect on the passage of time and the beauty of transformation. Just as the olive tree grows slowly but with purpose, you too evolve, adapt, and find strength in each new day. As you exhale, let gratitude flow through you, embracing the journey you are on with confidence. Take a moment now to simply be. Feel the peace of being present under the branches of your own imaginary olive tree, connected to the earth that supports you and the air that surrounds you. With each breath, fill your heart with gratitude for the deep roots that ground you, the branches that lift you, and the moments that shape the essence of your life.
Argos was born in the vast fields of Ithaca, a small island where the sea sang tales of adventure and the winds carried echoes of distant kingdoms. The island was a paradise of green hills and fertile valleys. Ancient olive trees offered shade and olives, while vineyards climbed the slopes, producing the wine that brought fame to Ithaca. The sea breeze caressed the rocky shores, carrying the salty aroma of the ocean and the cries of seagulls. At the heart of the island stood Odysseus' home, a stone palace built with strength and elegance. Its walls were adorned with tapestries depicting the feats of heroes and gods. The heavy wooden doors creaked when opened, and in the central courtyard, a fountain whispered with the constant flow of crystal clear water. The land surrounding the palace was full of life. Fields of wheat waved under the sun, and lush orchards offered figs, pomegranates, and lemons. From the moment he was a pup, Argos stood out among his siblings for his sharp perception and boundless energy. His coat, a blend of sandy and white tones, resembled the waves breaking on the shore. But what truly set him apart was his gaze, deep, golden eyes filled with an intelligence that seemed to understand more than any ordinary dog should. It was Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, who first noticed Argos among the litter. At the time, Odysseus was a young leader, strong and determined, yet generous at heart. Argos followed him from the moment they met, stumbling on his clumsy puppy paws as the king strolled through the fields. Soon, he became Odysseus's shadow, accompanying him everywhere, from meetings in the throne room to sword training sessions. Odysseus found in Argos not only a loyal companion but also a silent guardian. Though he could not speak, the dog understood the language of the heart and body. He knew how to comfort the king in moments of doubt and share his enthusiasm in victories. Argos was a quick learner, observing every detail of Odysseus's routines. He recognized the sound of his footsteps even amidst the palace's bustle, distinguishing his firm stride when attending to state affairs from the relaxed pace of leisurely afternoons. The dog had also memorized the scent of Odysseus's garments. His woolen cloak, worn on colder days, smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke, while his daily tunic carried the salty aroma of the sea. Argos understood what each outfit signified. The gleaming armor was for ceremonies and training, while the simple linen clothing marked tranquil days. One afternoon, while walking near the cliffs that bordered the island, Odysseus stopped and knelt beside Argos. "You're special, my friend," he said, stroking the dog's head. "One day, I may face journeys that take me far from Ithaca, but you will be my memory of this home. As long as you're here, a part of me will be too." Argos didn't understand the exact words, but Odysseus's tone and the gentle caress of his fur were enough to etch the moment into his soul. From then on, the dog became even more devoted, as if he understood his role was to protect Ithaca as much as his master. The happy days passed quickly. Argos grew strong, joining Odysseus on hunts and playing with Telemachus, the king's young son. His presence was a constant reminder of the peace and stability of the island. When Odysseus trained with his sword, Argos watched every movement as if he could predict the blade's next arc. On nights by the fire, while the king shared tales of his dreams and ambitions, Argos sat by his side, listening to every word as though he were another participant in the conversation. But that tranquility wouldn't last forever. One day, news arrived of Troy, a distant city that had become the center of a monumental conflict. When the heralds brought the call to war, Odysseus had no choice but to answer. He was a king, a leader, and his honor was at stake. Preparations for departure began swiftly, filling the palace with an air of urgency. Argos watched everything in silence, his heart beating with an unease he had never felt before. The night before his departure, Odysseus sat beside the dog on the palace steps beneath a sky full of stars. "Argos, my friend, I must leave," he said softly. "But I will return. I promise you. You'll take care of Ithaca for me, won't you?" The dog wagged his tail slowly, as if trying to convey his absolute commitment. Odysseus smiled sadly, stroked Argos for one last time, and stood up. When dawn broke and the ship set sail, Argos followed them to the shore. He remained on the beach, watching as Odysseus' ship disappeared into the horizon. Though others in Ithaca doubted the king's return, Argos never wavered. To him, Odysseus was a beacon, a constant presence even in the distance. His wait had begun. Odysseus' departure left a void in Ithaca, one that Argos felt with particular intensity. In the first days after the ship set sail, the dog waited by the shore, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The sea, once his companion during walks with Odysseus, now became an insurmountable barrier, a constant reminder of the distance separating them. Over time, Argos returned to the palace, but his routine was never the same. Though life in Ithaca carried on, every corner of Odysseus' home evoked memories of his master. Argos wandered the stone corridors, recognizing echoes of footsteps that no longer resounded. He often lay beside the empty throne or in the courtyard where they had trained together. The wind that rustled the curtains brought familiar scents, but each passing day seemed to blur Odysseus' presence a little more. Telemachus, though still young, tried to fill the absent space. Odysseus' son shared a quiet sadness with Argos, and together they became companions in waiting. Telemachus found in Argos a silent confidant, someone who, though unable to speak, seemed to understand his confusion and pain. There were nights when the boy sat beside the dog, stroking his head as he voiced his fears and doubts. Argos, with infinite patience, offered comfort through a calm gaze and steady warmth. As Telemachus grew older, Argos' presence became more than mere solace. With his experience and instinct, the dog imparted important lessons about leadership and responsibility. On hunts, Telemachus learned to observe his surroundings with the same attentiveness as Argos, to listen to the sounds of the forest, and to interpret the subtle movements of animals. Argos, with his steady gait and disciplined focus, became a role model in moments when the young prince doubted his own abilities. One afternoon, as they explored the fields near the palace, Telemachus tripped over a root and fell to the ground. Frustrated, he struck the earth with his fist, letting out a cry of anger. Argos, a few steps away, approached slowly, nudging the boy's hand with his nose. Telemachus looked up and saw in the dog's eyes a calmness that seemed to tell him that falling was part of learning. That day, he understood that strength lies not in never falling, but in rising and moving forward. The years began to pile up like fallen leaves in autumn. Argos' coat, once shiny and smooth, began to show the marks of time. Some nights, the dog still dreamed of Odysseus' presence. In his dreams, the king returned with his unmistakable laughter, tossing a stick for Argos to fetch. But upon waking, only silence greeted him. The island, too, bore the absence of its leader. Fields that once thrived with life began to fall into neglect, and rumors of suitors invading the palace filled the air. Argos watched them distrustfully from the shadows. He knew these men did not belong to Ithaca as Odysseus did. Though the servants often kept him away from gatherings, the dog remained vigilant, watching from the corners. Some days, Argos roamed the nearby fields, searching for traces of his master. His keen sense of smell guided him to places where they had once hunted or rested under the olive trees. But all he found were old tracks and faded scents. The seasons changed, but his devotion never wavered. Over time, Telemachus began to take on more responsibilities in the palace. Though the shadow of the suitors loomed over him, Argos's silent teachings had prepared him to face challenges with determination. The young man had learned to wait patiently, to observe before acting, and most importantly, to remain loyal to the values instilled in him by Odysseus. Argos, though old and weary, continued to be his most faithful companion. One afternoon, during one of his solitary walks, Argos stopped at a cliff's edge. From there, he could see the horizon he had watched so many times before. The waves crashed against the rocks in a steady rhythm, like a heart that never stops. Argos lifted his gaze to the sky and, for a fleeting moment, felt Odysseus's presence in the wind. It was a brief sensation, but enough to renew his hope. As the years passed, the suitors began to occupy more spaces in the palace, filling it with false laughter and endless feasts. Argos, now older and more tired, spent much of his time in a corner of the courtyard where the warm sun caressed his worn body. Though his movements were slow and his energy diminished, his heart remained as steadfast as ever. At night, when all was silent, Argos still lifted his head at the faintest sound of distant footsteps. Every creak of wood or murmur of the wind made him believe that Odysseus might be returning. But dawn always brought the same reality. His master was still far away. Despite everything, Argos never lost hope. In his heart, he knew that his master was a man of his word, a leader who would fulfill his promise to return. And so, with each passing day, Argos renewed his vigil, determined to wait as long as necessary. Time in Ithaca seemed to have stood still, yet the years had left their mark on the palace's inhabitants. Argos, now old and with his coat speckled in gray, remained a silent guardian. Though his legs no longer possessed their youthful agility, his heart still beat with unwavering devotion to Odysseus. In his usual spot under the shade of an olive tree, Argos watched the comings and goings of the suitors, who filled the palace with their arrogance and hollow laughter. One morning, as the sun rose over the golden wheat fields, a murmur spread through the streets of Ithaca. Fishermen returning from the sea spoke of a man traveling from island to island, searching for a way home. Though Odysseus's name was not mentioned outright, hope ignited like a flame in the hearts of those who remained loyal to him. Argos sensed the shift in the palace's atmosphere. The servants whispered among themselves, and Telemachus, now a resolute young man, spent more time on the cliffs, gazing at the horizon with renewed light in his eyes. Though no one dared to say it aloud, the possibility of Odysseus's return was a thought they had long buried with the passing years. The old dog, ever alert, seemed to perceive something in the air. His instinct, which had never failed him, told him that something significant was about to happen. One afternoon, as he rested near the palace entrance, a scent stirred him from his lethargy. It was faint, mingled with the salty tang of the sea, but unmistakably familiar. His tail, which had barely moved in recent days, stirred up dust around him. Noticing Argos's behavior, Telemachus approached him. "What's wrong, old friend?" he asked, crouching to pet him. The dog lifted his head and fixed his golden eyes on the young man as if trying to convey a message. Though Telemachus couldn't fully understand, he felt a sense of urgency. He resolved to set out the next day, hoping to uncover answers from the rumors reaching the island. The suitors, oblivious to the signs, continued their feasting and bickering. Argos, however, never took his eyes off the palace's main entrance. Each time the wind carried a scent from the harbor, the old dog would struggle to his feet, hoping to see the familiar figure of his master. Days later, Telemachus returned to the palace with a renewed energy. He had met a traveler who spoke of a cunning and brave man searching for his home. Though he didn't say it outright, in his heart, he knew this man could only be his father. As Telemachus discussed plans with the few allies who remained, Argos watched from his corner, satisfied to see the young man embracing the role of leader he had learned so well from Odysseus. One night, under a sky full of stars, Argos felt a strange calm. The wind from the sea carried a promise only he seemed to understand. Though his body was weary, his eyes shone with the intensity of his youth. He knew his long, lonely wait was nearing its end. The rumors continued to reach Ithaca, growing clearer and more certain. The island's inhabitants began speaking of a man who had arrived on a nearby island, claiming to be the lost king of Ithaca. Telemachus, now confident in the truth, gathered his allies to prepare. He knew his father's return would not be easy, not with the suitors entrenched in the palace. Argos, for his part, kept waiting. Each day, with a patience forged by years, he watched the horizon and the palace entrances. His body was worn, but his heart remained steadfast. He had waited a lifetime for this moment and had no intention of giving up now. At last, one morning, the air carried a scent that made Argos lift his head abruptly. It was him. There was no doubt. Though his vision was clouded with age, his heart recognized what his eyes could no longer see clearly. His tail wagged with a force that seemed impossible for his years, and a low, hoarse bark escaped his throat. The promise was about to be fulfilled. The sun had barely begun to rise over the horizon when the figure of a man appeared on the path leading to the palace of Ithaca. He was dressed in rags, and his steps were slow, as though he had borne the weight of the world on his shoulders. Yet, in his eyes shone a determination no disguise could conceal. Odysseus had returned. Argos, lying in his usual spot beneath the olive tree, lifted his head as he caught the scent he had waited years to smell again. It was a mix of salt, sweat, and something profoundly familiar. Though his sight was no longer clear, he needed nothing more to know that his master was there. With titanic effort, the old dog attempted to rise. His legs trembled, but his heart, filled with renewed energy, propelled him forward. Odysseus froze at the sound of a faint bark. He turned his head toward the olive tree and saw him, an old dog, his coat gray and his body frail, yet with eyes brimming with love and recognition. "Argos," he murmured, his voice breaking with emotion. He let his staff fall to the ground and knelt before his faithful companion. The dog, unsteady but determined, managed to reach him. Each step was slow, yet each carried profound meaning. When Argos was finally close enough, he rested his head in Odysseus's hands, closing his eyes as a deep sigh escaped his muzzle. In that moment, time and distance seemed to dissolve. Odysseus stroked Argos's coarse fur, tears streaming down his face. "I promised I would return," he said softly, as though speaking to an old friend who had always been there. "And you waited for me." The bond between them, unbroken despite the years, filled the air with a nearly sacred calm. Meanwhile, the palace began to stir. Hearing the murmurs of the servants, Telemachus hurried outside and saw his father beside the dog. His heart swelled with joy and wonder, but also with profound sadness at the sight of Argos's condition. The young man approached slowly, respecting the moment between the dog and his father. Argos opened his eyes once more and looked at Telemachus, recognizing him as the boy he had watched grow into a man. With the last of his strength, the dog wagged his tail weakly, as though greeting them both. His mission was complete. He had cared for Ithaca and waited for his master's return. The sun was now high in the sky when Argos drew his final breath. His body, tired but at peace, lay still beside Odysseus. The king, deeply moved, gently stroked the dog's head one last time before closing his eyes with his own hands. "Rest now, my friend. You have been more loyal than any man." The atmosphere at the palace shifted that day. The suitors continued their feasting in the main hall, oblivious to the reunion and farewell that had just occurred. Odysseus, his face hardened with resolve, knew he had one final battle to fight. But in his heart, he carried the strength Argos had given him in their last moments together. Telemachus, alongside his father, buried Argos in a special place beneath the olive tree where he had so often rested. That ancient and sturdy tree had borne witness to the family's most intimate moments. Odysseus recalled sitting beneath its branches in his youth, planning adventures and reflecting on his reign. Now, the tree, with its deep roots and resilient trunk, became Argos's guardian, a symbol of the eternal connection between the dog, his master, and the land of Ithaca. They placed stones around this site, marking the resting place of Ithaca's most loyal guardian. "He will always be remembered," Telemachus said, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. That night, as the stars shone brightly over Ithaca, Odysseus looked to the heavens and recalled the words he had spoken years earlier beside that same dog. As long as you're here, a part of me will be too. Now, he knew that although Argos was no longer physically present, his spirit would forever live in the home they had both protected with so much love and devotion.